Thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm Katie Wallace, and we're talking about holistic approach to fats and cardiovascular health. So before I start, I want to be clear that I'm not a medical doctor, and I'm providing this information for health education reasons only. Sorry, it always takes my computer a minute to forward those slides here when I first start. There we go. So my business is Human Nature LLC, and I'm located on Madison's West Side. And I'm offering these lectures, which are once a month, virtually for now, through a partnership with the Willie Street Co-op. And so you can check out future lectures here every month. Next month in May, we're going to talk about leaky gut or hyperpermeable intestines. And I'm just looking, that's going to be on Wednesday, May 12th, and it's going to be at noon again. So I hope you'll tune in with us then. The other service I provide to the co-op besides these free webinars and lectures are $40 private sessions. So you can meet with me for 45 minutes at the reduced rate, which is again offered in partnership with the Willie Street Co-op. So if you're interested in meeting with me, you can register for those by contacting me directly. So you would either email me or call my office in order to get registered for one of those sessions. I also offer office visits outside of the special co-op sessions. Okay, so today we're talking about fats. And I'd like to spend the beginning of the program just talking about basic information about fats. And then we're going to move on and talk about cardiovascular health. We'll talk about cholesterol, including why particle sizes may matter, triglycerides, and something called Advancedglycation end products. And then we'll finish by talking about and summarizing the ways that you can optimize your heart health, with an emphasis on working on blood sugar control, reducing something called pro-inflammatory cytokine production, and reducing general free radical activity. So a fat, by definition, is a chain of carbon atoms, and each carbon atom has 2 to 3 receptor sites for hydrogen. And I know this sounds a little boring, but this becomes important when we're talking about the differences between the different types of fats. You can see pictured here the saturated fats, how they have a hydrogen at every receptor site. And then you can see the unsaturated fat below it, where there's some open spaces. So that'll become important as we talk further. Oh, I forgot to mention, if you have questions while we're going, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll answer questions at the end. So this is a picture of some of the foods from which saturated fats come. So you may be familiar with coconut oil or palm oil, butter, eggs. Like I said, in saturated fats, all of the carbon receptor sites are filled with the hydrogen, and that makes these fats very stable, very solid. They stack nicely, so like you can make a nice cube of butter because it's a saturated fat and it layers itself very nicely. The longer the carbon chain of this fat, the more solid the fat is. So for example, beef tallow, which is the fat from beef, is very long, and so long that it can be made into candles. Whereas butter is pretty short. Yes, it could be solid at room temperature, but as the temperature rises, the butter becomes softer. As far as unsaturated fats go, like I mentioned, some of the receptor sites on the carbon molecules are still open. And so this makes an unsaturated fat a liquid at room temperature. And so it's really difficult to get it to stack nicely. It's going to be more like an oil or a liquid. You're going to have to do something to it in order to make it solid like butter. There's also something called a monounsaturated fat, which is a type of unsaturated fat with only one receptor site open. So olive oil is a very popular example of monounsaturated fat. It has many health benefits. Bacon also is 85% monounsaturated fat. Polyunsaturated fats are when there are multiple receptor sites open. So we see here, like this is a bottle of vegetable oil, maybe we've got some sesame oil or fish oil. These are all different examples of polyunsaturated fats. So in the polyunsaturated fats or the monounsaturated fats, those spaces, those sites that are open can be filled with oxygen, and that is what makes it very important to care for these fats with more care. Like you can't heat them too much because heating them up will cause oxygen to fill the space. And when oxygens are attracted to the oil, they're given up. So that means they oxidize, and an oxidized particle will cause free radical damage in the body. So if it's, anything that rancid or oxidized oil touches, it can cause free radical damage too. So a rancid oil, like an oil that you tasted, it tastes kind of acidic and rancid, has been oxidized. And if you drink it, it will cause more free radical damage inside the body, which means that extra particle that it's got from oxidizing will like to grab onto other particles, and that's what free radical damage is inside the body. So basically, free radical activity can accelerate the aging process or accelerate the process of damage on different things, including the inside of our bodies. Here's an example of how free radical damage affects us. So it can affect our eyes, accelerate the formation of cataracts, for example. Free radical damage can accelerate neurological diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. It can create wrinkles and age spots on our skin. It can cause digestive issues. It can cause heart issues or contribute to high blood pressure. It can also contribute to blood sugar control and lend itself to the development of diabetes or cancer or the failure of different organisms. So overall, when we're talking about a healthy diet and healthy fats, we want to choose fats that do not promote free radical damage. And so if we're choosing those fats, the unsaturated fats that I just mentioned, we want to be really careful and make good selections and store them properly so that they don't promote free radical damage to our cardiovascular system or, these other parts of the body. So fatty acids are components of fats. And there are omega-3 fatty acids, omega-6 fatty acids, and omega-9 fatty acids. And all of them play different roles in the body and have different benefits. And when they get out of balance, that can cause problems too. Here's a visual talking about where these foods come from. So omega-3 fatty acids tend to come from fish and flaxseed, and those are the popular sources, although you can get omega-3s from animals that are grass-fed. Omega-6s tend to come more from vegetables and grains, and omega-9 as well from seeds and nuts and soy. As I mentioned, you can get omega-3s not just from fish and flaxseed, but also from any food source from a grass-fed animal. And I would point out that there's some medical literature that shows that people don't break the omega-3s down very well when they're from a vegetarian source. So if they're from flax, for example, a lot of people lack the enzyme to break those down to the beneficial prostaglandins. Whereas fish, we know if people get omega-3 from fish, We know that just about everybody, just about every genetic type that we know about can break that down into the beneficial components. So these essential fatty acids, or EFAs, are converted into something called prostaglandins, which are hormone-like substances that are in every part of our body and help regulate and receive information and help the functioning of just about every part of the body. So that's when you're taking in omegas, trying to increase your omegas, that's really what the bottom line is trying to get these prostaglandins. And that's why for most people, it can be really helpful to get it from an animal source because they may not be able to digest it from a vegetarian source. So the benefits of the fatty acids are that they lower lipid levels. So we're going to talk about those lipids, but by lipids, I mean the different types of cholesterol and the triglycerides. So the more omega-3 fats and beneficial omega-6 and 9 you get, then that helps the lipid system in the body. They also reduce and balance blood clotting. They lower blood pressure and encourage circulation in general. They are very important for brain health and the immune system. As it says here, they help activate the T cells that destroy cancer cells. They're also effective against some chronic immune issues like eczema and arthritis. And they help things like relieving dry eyes, as we need the fatty acids to lubricate the eyes and to lubricate the skin, to lubricate the joints. So lots and lots of benefits of the fatty acids. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but I just wanted to give you a sample. So there's a lot of confusion about saturated versus polyunsaturated fats. So I want to go into that now. Saturated fats, as I've said, are more stable. And because they're more stable, they're less likely to oxidize. So we don't tend to see free radical damage with saturated fats. Polyunsaturated fats, however, are more likely to include those essential fatty acids that we want, like from fish or from nuts or seeds, but they're relatively unstable. So there's kind of a trade-off, and they need a lot more care in handling them than maybe a saturated fat requires. So when you're selecting fats, it's important to keep some things in mind. The whole food forms are always going to be a great choice. So eating fish to get the fat in the fish, like salmon, or eating nuts like pecans, macadamia nuts. You want to buy nuts that are either raw or dry roasted, that don't involve any kind of processed oil being added to it. So you have to read the label carefully for that, because you can't find nuts like that in most like big box stores. You have to know what you're looking for. The same with seeds. An avocado or an olive are another example of a whole food form of fat that's an excellent choice. You want to look for unrefined oils. So when it comes to oil processing, and I'm sorry about that dinging in the background. When it comes to the oil processing, there's not much regulation or agreement about standards for labeling. And so if anything is refined at all, it could mean a lot of things. It could mean a high temperature, which you know would promote oxidation of that fat. It could provide the utilization of a lot of chemicals to get the oil from the food. Because when these oil companies are making oils for food consumption, they can often press let's say they're pressing olives the first time, or pressing a grain like corn the first time, but then they're going to want to keep pressing or keep manipulating that kernel to get most of the oil out, but if not all of it out, so that they can maximize their profit. So they'll use higher temperatures, extra pressings, extra chemicals in an effort to get all of the oil out of that seed. But those things can be more damaging to the oil and promote free radical damage. So we do see the more processed an oil is, like if it says it's partially refined or highly refined, then you definitely want to avoid that. If something says refined on the label, it means that they use temperatures above 450 as well as chemical solvents to extract the oil from the food. And that's something I would suggest avoiding because it's going to denature the benefits of the food. Expeller pressed, you will often see those words on a label for an oil. That means that low heat was used and it's been filtered one time. So it's not the best. It's not the same as completely unrefined, but definitely better than refined. And cold pressed is another word you'll often see on labels. That means that they're allowed to use temperatures up to 100 degrees, but not beyond that. So when you see cold pressed and you see unrefined on the label, you know that you're good to go. Or if you know that you're eating a whole food, then you're good to go that way. But anything indicating a refining process is best to avoid. So expeller and refined oils will be depleted of some key components of the food that actually help protect the oil from promoting free radical damage. So you'll lose the lecithin and the chlorophyll and a number of antioxidants like vitamin E, beta carotene. You'll also lose some of the minerals that are listed here. So here's an example of a healthy polyunsaturated oil that you might buy at the store. Udo's oil is a blend of different seed oils like flax, sesame, sunflower, and it's kept cold in the refrigerator. You can also note that it's kept in a dark brown bottle. Since we know that oils will oxidize when exposed to light, it's good to buy oil that's in polyunsaturated oils that are in a darker bottle and kept in a cool place. So these are examples, pictures of margarine, basically, that they took the oil, the polyunsaturated oil, and they pumped oxygen into it in order to make it stack well so that it's kind of like butter. These are going to promote free radical damage in the body, and we know that from different scientific studies done with these fats. It can be really confusing because you hear, even on the radio these days, you'll hear how beneficial the polyunsaturated fats like canola or corn oil are. But the longer term studies, so short-term studies do show a reduction in cholesterol when people first switch to these fats. But if you look at long-term studies, after a few years, we start to see problems with eating these fats. So definitely want to avoid margarine and hydrogenated fats. I think most people are educated about that these days. And I would say also want to avoid expeller pressed and refined oils in general. I don't have a slide for this, but we'll go back here real quick. The balance of omega-3 to omega-6 and 9 fats can be very important for health. And if you have a good ratio of omega-3 to omega-6, then you'll be less likely to develop problems with your cardiovascular system. So one of the common therapies when someone is at higher risk is to suggest more omega-3 oils. I believe the optimal ratio is 1 to 4, and most standard Americans, I believe, are closer to 1 to 12 in that ratio of 3 to 6. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because most Americans eat a lot of grain-based food. You know, we eat rice and bread and pasta and maybe we're even eating a lot of vegetables, which is great, but we're putting, you know, grains all over them or oils from grains in our salad dressing. If you look at the salad dressing oil at the store, if you look at the salad dressing oil aisle at the store, you'll see that most of the oils are omega-6 oils or omega-9. Olive oil is none of these, so that can be a good neutral oil to use. Coconut oil can also be beneficial. One of the signs that you have too much omega-6 is often high cholesterol, but hives and an immune system that's extremely sensitive. Lots of allergies can be a sign that you have too much omega-6. Right. This is just a picture of what they do to fats when they make them into margarine. So you can see naturally the fats on the left are kind of kinked when they're in their natural polyunsaturated forms. And then you can see what they do to make a trans fat to make it more stable and stackable so that it looks like kind of like butter. This is what margarine looks like at a chemical level on the right. So like I said, there's lots of problems with trans fat. Basically, we can't break them down because it interferes with a liver enzyme. And then we're not getting prostaglandins from our fats either. And it does appear that there's an increased incidence of heart disease and cancer when we eat these processed polyunsaturated fats, known as trans fats. So that's kind of rule number one. If you're gonna cut out a processed fat from your diet for your health, is get rid of trans fats. And trans fats will develop in your kitchen, even with a healthy oil that you bought at the store. So if you heat that oil above 320 degrees, then it can become a trans fat and it can increase all those problems I just mentioned. So you don't want to reuse oil. You want to throw it out after you've used it, if you have any left. You want to keep it in a cool, dark location, and you want to cook it below the smoking point. And that's something you can look up on the internet. Obviously, you'll know in the kitchen when you're cooking if the pan's too hot and things are smoking. But 320 degrees is a little bit lower than like a medium heat on the stove range, for example, or in the oven. So now I'd like to change gears and talk a little bit about cholesterol. Cholesterol is a molecule made in the liver, and it is acts like a hormone. And in fact, it is the precursor for all of our hormones. So testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, we have to have cholesterol and healthy cholesterol levels in order to have hormone balance. It has a lot of other benefits too. It helps us recover from exercise. So if you're one of those people who's just exhausted after exercise, like more so than you should be after healthy exercise, that can be a sign of low cholesterol levels. It helps keep our cells strong because it helps with maintaining good tone in the cell wall. As I mentioned, cholesterol is necessary for all stress and sexual hormones. It allows for communication between tissues. It works as an antioxidant, and it's important for making myelin. So 25% of the cholesterol we make is used in our brain to help repair and help communication in the brain. So there's a lot of benefits to cholesterol. It's not all bad. Too low of cholesterol isn't good either. We all are aware of some of the negative correlations with high cholesterol, but you don't want to have low cholesterol. Here's an example. A client I worked with, and a lot of clients I work with will have levels like these. Other clients have high levels. So you want to have a balanced level, not just high or low. So you can see here, her cholesterol in total was 127. You can't make enough hormones to be healthy if you're below 150. So she wasn't currently making enough progesterone or estrogen, and she was trying to have a family and get pregnant. So in a case like this, we don't want a low fat diet. We want as much fat as we can get into her for all those reasons. You also see a triglyceride at 80. Okay, well, that's within range. But when we look at the ratio of triglyceride to HDL, which is 41, the triglyceride to HDL ratio is much too high. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Then we see the VLDL and the LDL, which also look okay for her. But again, the LDL looks a little low for a healthy woman, in my opinion. So when I say low, I mean it's functionally low, not medically low. So it would be considered suboptimal or lower than optimal. So the same with the cholesterol. This is not medically low, but it's suboptimal. And if you have problems with fertility or hormones, then it's inappropriately low. So most of us were raised with this image in mind or something like this, that cholesterol is a bad thing and it gets in our arteries and it causes plaque buildup. And that is dangerous for us. And eating foods high in cholesterol, like eggs and cheese and meat and milk, are also bad for this whole process. Although it's logical that cholesterol in our diet may contribute to cholesterol in our bodies, it's not actually how things work. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Cholesterol in our diet can increase the cholesterol that our liver makes by 20%, but that's it. And so there's a lot of other processes in the body that contribute to frighteningly high cholesterol levels that people have, that may be an indication that they're at risk for extensive heart problems or a stroke. So let's talk about how plaque forms. So there are 3 stages, if we just try to simplify this process of the development of plaque in the arteries. So the first step would be inflammation. The endothelium is a layer of cells that line our blood vessels in our heart. And when it becomes damaged or inflamed or injured somehow, the white blood cells there begin to multiply. So this is the first stage. This is what happens in a healthy person. Our endothelium, or that layer of cells in the blood vessels, are exposed to things all the time. The next stage would be the repair phase, where the smooth muscles prompted by this immune response to the inflammation begin to multiply, and that then allows or triggers cholesterol and collagen to form some scar tissue, and calcium is also deposited there. So again, this is the body's healthy response to some kind of inflammation to a tissue in the body. If the thing that caused the injury or the inflammation is removed and addressed by this, then these white blood cells and smooth muscles that have multiplied, and collagen and cholesterol and calcium will go away, and we're back before stage 1. And but what happens when the inflammation continues, that the body can't keep the inflammation at bay, is that this situation multiplies. So the plaque can become an abscess. The outside wall can become too thin, and it can erupt and make a blockage, which is what contributes to heart attack or stroke. So I generally like to think of cholesterol more as something that's found at the scene of the crime, rather than the cause of this process, because we can all agree, if we break it down, the first cause is that there's some trigger for inflammation. And so the big question is, if you're working with someone who has signs of this inflammation, what is it? What's causing it? And it could be a lot of different things. It could be they're too sedentary. It could be they have a food sensitivity, like they're sensitive to gluten. It could be that they have some kind of infection that's never been detected. It could be that they have heavy metals. So there's many, many different things that cause this original inflammation. And it's not always obvious what that is, but you can do a lot of things to help reduce the inflammation. And nowadays you can do different tests to get more information and try to identify what a potential trigger might be. You don't always find it, but we do have those tools available. So here's the image of what I described, where you have healthy artery on the left, and then you see the immune response and the smooth muscles and the cholesterol and the collagen all accumulate. So I would venture to say this is a picture of, and maybe I need some candy and some sugar here too, but breads are one of the foods that put us at highest risk. So I think the message that we all got in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s was misleading. And we still have horrible rates of heart disease that are actually worse than they were before we got into the low fat craze. So it's time to dial that back a little bit and focus on how healthy fats can benefit us, and also better understand how the foods we choose affect our blood sugar balance, because it's really blood sugar balance that's one of the main driving factors for inflammation to the cardiovascular system. So this is a chart of the glycemic index. It's you can find something like this on the internet or in a lot of different books. It just basically ranks the glycemic index, which is a measure of how much the sugar affects our system, generally speaking. And so you'll see at the top, you'll just see a lot of I don't know if you can see this, it's pretty small, I realize, but you've got honey, candy, sugar, things like that are at the top. Breads are at the top for baked goods and cereals. So things that are high in glycemic index are actually going to potentially raise cholesterol levels, and things that damage the arterial lining much more than a saturated fat for most people. And there can be a genetic component to this, but most people will do better reducing their carbohydrates and enjoying healthy saturated fats than vice versa. So this is a slide I got from one of my mentors who basically believes that every disease process in the body stems from blood sugar. And he has a good point. So what happens when we eat a food high in sugar or high in the glycemic index is that it raises our blood sugar level or our glucose level. And then something called advanced glycation end products increase, or AGEs. We'll talk about those in a minute. We also get a type of lipid called triglyceride, which is can be very damaging for the body when it's in high amounts. Our overall cholesterol can increase, our LDL can increase, and our HDL will decrease. And for men, this leads to a decrease in testosterone, and for women, usually an increase in estrogen and a decrease in progesterone. So we kind of have this chain effect of our health in the body just from eating foods that are high in sugar. And I mentioned the triglyceride to HDL ratio when we were talking about that example cholesterol panel. But this is an article that I'd like to reference. These researchers looked at people's lipid panels, so they're basically their cholesterol panels, and then they looked at whether or not they had extensive heart disease or coronary disease. And what they found was that the total cholesterol and really all the other numbers in the lipid panel didn't really matter and didn't really correlate to whether or not they had severe heart disease. They just found one value was important, and that is called triglyceride to HDL ratio. So you basically take your triglyceride value and you put it over HDL, and what is that number? And what they found was that if that number is greater than 1.5, somebody had high risk for potentially developing extensive problems. So I sometimes encourage people to look at this number because they may not know about this information. Triglycerides are formed when we eat carbohydrates. If you've ever eaten a pancake breakfast and then fallen asleep on the couch afterward, your body is making triglycerides in that situation. So when we have too much sugar, we have to rest, and our body takes that excess sugar and it stores it in the form of triglycerides. And it can take a lot of energy, which is why we feel pretty sleepy. And HDL is typically formed from eating good fats. Also, purple vegetables, like those in the cruciferous family, can help with raising HDL. So if you want to have a healthier triglyceride to HDL ratio, it can help to reduce carbohydrates and sugars, which are the reason why the triglycerides are developing to begin with, increase healthy fats to help raise HDL and provide a food source for the reduction in the carbohydrates, right? If you're going to say cut out bread from your diet, then you need to replace it with healthy calories. So eating more avocados and olives and maybe bacon and eggs, things like that will help. And you can also eat more of the purple vegetables like purple cabbage and kale are examples that help raise the HDL. So there's actually a lot of studies on heart disease. A couple of the ones I pointed out here are from UC Berkeley and University of Connecticut. And what they're finding is that it's the small LDL particles that can often contribute to plaque formation, as well as advanced glycation end products that are really at play for the development of plaque. So, So I'd like to talk about particle sizes related to cholesterol. So the liver is making cholesterol, and when these cholesterol molecules are first made, they're large and not very dense. So they're very buoyant. And the job of these particles is to move fats to and from our cells in our bodies so that we get energy. When we eat carbohydrates, our foods or foods high in the glycemic index, then it causes our body to make very small and dense particles, which are much smaller than the big particles when they were born, and also helps with transporting the triglycerides that we're making because we ate all those carbohydrates. Fats don't really affect the development of these small, dense particles, which is why a high-fat diet in the studies that have been done don't substantially increase the risk of heart disease for most people. So it turns out that these small LDL particles that are formed in the body in response to us eating sugars and carbs actually do contribute to the buildup of plaque. Again, I would say just to balance things that that study I was talking about where, they looked at everybody who had extensive heart disease and they looked at their lipid numbers, and what they found really mattered was triglyceride HDL. So, we still don't know. We're still learning a lot. There's a lot of evidence that small LDL particles play a role, but how much of a role, we don't know. So just want to be transparent that, we're still learning about all these different things. But apparently these small particles tend to linger in the bloodstream a little longer. They're much more likely to oxidize, and they can trigger the white blood cells to grow in that stage 1 that I was talking about when we were talking about plaque formation. So here's just a visual of this process I'm talking about, where when we have dietary carbohydrates coming in to the digestive system because we ate them, then they're going to go to the liver and be converted into triglycerides and also these smaller LDL particles that seem to be correlated with more free radical damage. And then the plaquing can respond to that process. But when you get a lipid panel, this is what you typically get, and you don't see any particle size information here. So that's another test. There's a test called CardioIQ that I can help people with getting, where it does break down the particle size, both the size of the particles and the number of those different sizes, so that you get a sense of if your LDL is high, for example, is it healthy LDL? Are you just a really smart person? Because some of the studies have shown that people with high total cholesterol and high LDL are much smarter than the rest of us. Or are they small LDL particles? And, this is something where you need to look at getting more antioxidant support for your system and looking at some lifestyle changes or diet changes to see if those help improve some of the numbers. Advanced glycation end products was one of the other things I said increases when you have too much sugar. And it's basically like when you have too much sugar, the sugar molecules will bind to the different proteins or fats in your system and cause a lot of problems. So we know now that these AGEs, as they're called, are a contributor to heart disease, cataracts, ED, cancer, and dementia. Basically, they're just inducing that oxidation and free radical damage and the inflammation from that, and the body's just responding to that. So if we're perpetually eating sugar, that might work for us when we're younger, but all of us lose our tolerance for sugar as we get older. And so we're getting too much sugar for our systems, most of us, as we age, and then we develop all of these other issues when we're getting too much of it. Here's a picture of the advanced glycation end products or glycated proteins. So they can combine with a protein anywhere in our eyes, in different tissues. So they affect the whole body wherever these AGE metabolites can form as an end result of us taking in too much sugars or carbs. So again, I said, we're still learning a lot. I don't at all want you to think that this is for sure, the whole story of what is happening with cardiovascular health, but it seems that the main processes that we understand today that cause heart disease and stroke are inflammation. There's got to be something driving the inflammatory process. And as I mentioned, a lot of times that is loss of blood sugar control and increase in carbohydrates, but it could be other things too. Small LDL particle formation and oxidation seems to be one potential trigger for some people for the plaquing process, and glycation, which is directly from eating too much sugar for the system. And so we want to focus on supporting the immune system because the immune system is responding to the different triggers for inflammation. And we want to focus on blood sugar control. So if you want to have, healthy cholesterol levels for you, then focusing on supporting your immune system and your blood sugar control will typically go a long way towards meeting that goal. And to that end, if we're going to talk about immune system, then looking at the health of the gut can be very important. In fact, there are some studies that show that leaky gut, which is what I'm going to be talking about in May, that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, leaky gut is linked to some forms of heart disease. So when the gut wall is broken down, the immune system is much more likely to be going kind of haywire and triggering a lot of inflammation in the body. So sometimes it might not seem right for thinking about our heart health to be looking at the gut, but indeed there is a pretty strong connection there. Here's another picture of if we have leaky gut, then we're not getting the nutrients we need. We may be developing sensitivities to foods or vulnerable to infections, and that's driving a lot of inflammation, which can affect our cardiovascular system. So there are different things you can use. I'll talk more about these next month to help support the health of the gut lining and the gut community in general, probiotics and vitamin D, glutathione. These are all things that help the gut lining to stay strong and help to reduce inflammation in the body. Lots of antioxidants are very beneficial because they help neutralize the inflammatory process and help support the immune system in calming things down. So glutathione is an antioxidant that we make in our body, but we can also take a supplement. And I'm sure these vitamins look familiar to you. C, E, A, and D are all very powerful antioxidants and very important for the immune system too, as well as CoQ10, or I like to suggest ubiquinol, which is the reduced form of CoQ10, which is a powerful antioxidant and very helpful for the heart cells in particular. They need a lot of CoQ10, so CoQ10 can be very protective. Anti-inflammatories can help if we already have some signs or indications that there's a lot of inflammation. So turmeric and resveratrol are two superfoods that come from, turmeric comes from the turmeric plant. Resveratrol comes from a couple of different plants, Japanese knotweed being one of the more popular sources. essential fatty acids, which I talked about in the beginning, fish oil generally being the one that's best utilized by people. And let's not forget exercise. Just getting the healthy blood flow through our bodies and getting all the benefits of exercise can go a long way to keeping things in balance in the body also. I also want to be thinking about liver health, or what's sometimes called biotransformation or detoxification in the body. So this is focused on eliminating those things that might be triggers for inflammation. So if we have a lot of support for our liver and we have a diet that supports the liver, then it helps us with eliminating the heavy metals and the chemicals and the pathogens that, we're going to come in contact with these. Bitter and sour foods and herbs help with the liver health. It help with bile flow. Cruciferous vegetables, again, we talked about those related to HDL, but those would be cabbage, kale, broccoli, cauliflower. Probiotics are also beneficial for healthy elimination of different contaminants and bad things we come in contact with. Probiotics being healthy bacteria, in case that's an unfamiliar term. Sulfur is a mineral that helps drive one of the main detoxification pathways in the body. So sulfur-rich vegetables are things in the onion family. You can also do Epsom salt baths as a source of magnesium sulfate, which is a source of sulfur. Amino acids are very important for liver health too, and those are found in proteins in the diet primarily. And then again, exercise is very helpful for the liver. It helps to keep things circulating, helps with cleansing the blood. So the type of diet I usually suggest would be high in proteins, vegetables, and fats. So focusing on just a rainbow of vegetables. Beneficial proteins could be fish and seafood, bison, grass-fed beef, and instead of eating a lot of high carbohydrate based meal, you might focus on root vegetables if you need some carbohydrates, as well as an emphasis on all those beneficial fats I talked about earlier: olive oil, avocados, eggs, butter. So those definitely need to be emphasized. So this is an example of a diet that was used in clinical studies that actually helped improve inflammation in the body. So it had an emphasis on meat and fish, fruits, although I would encourage people to have low glycemic fruits like berries, low sugar fruits generally, vegetables, refined fats, and if you need to do carbohydrates, doing root vegetables. So if you want to have a healthy lipid panel and, more importantly, a healthy cardiovascular system, it's important to eliminate the high carbohydrate foods from your diet, as well as refined oils, and eat the foods that are right for you. You can include the anti-inflammatories and antioxidants that I mentioned in your lifestyle, and exercise regularly, and do things that support your immune and gut health. So just to wrap up here, I'll answer questions in a minute, but just a reminder that I do offer those $40 virtual sessions. So if you're interested in that, you can email us or give us a call. And thank you so much for joining me.